I was like the outlier or the outcast in like almost every community within my small town, because I was just like, I'm not meant to be here. This just doesn't make sense for me. It's not in alignment with who I feel like I am. And so that was like basically how my youth kind of was dictated by that belief of like, I don't fit in.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I grew up in the country. My first job was actually at a buffet. I was like working on the front lines as like a host. And then I got a job at on a farm, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's definitely unique. Okay.
Yeah, man. So my dad actually saw I was like goofing off at work, goofing off at school, and he wanted to teach me a valuable lesson, which was like, what happens if you don't do good in school? My parents are both very collegiate. You know, they worked at universities. They all had higher education degrees.
Okay.
And so, yeah, they wanted to teach me the importance of an education. So they put me on work at the farm, baling hay and alfalfa, and it was brutal.
Baling hay and alfalfa.
Yeah,
that's
man.
not a common journey that we hear in the studio. So
Yeah, man.
That's definitely unique. Okay, tell us a little bit about how that potentially impacted your journey. Like,
For sure. I mean,
like?
Well, honestly, like, there's nothing that compares to like real physical labor. And I think what happens is a lot of entrepreneurs today, they've never really experienced that. Maybe they haven't done plumbing or welding or experienced these trades. And so they oftentimes don't have the appreciation when they're in the grind of being like, look, I've done things that are a lot harder and pay a lot less. And so that was something that, looking back on it, I can appreciate now. So I definitely appreciate my dad for like putting me through that. But at the time it was horrible. It was horrible. I mean, I would get there at the crack of dawn. The sun was just, breaking the mountains, and I would just be working, sweating. I had the worst farmer's tan you could possibly imagine. And so by the end of the day, my dad would come and pick me up, and I would get in the car, knocked out. I would knock out before we even left the dirt road.
That's hard work.
Yeah,
that's
man.
hard work. That's the impact.
Yeah, so it was great. It was a good experience. Anytime that I feel like maybe I'm getting a little too prideful, or things just aren't, where I think they should be, or I feel like I'm not as grateful as I should be for whatever area in my life, or season I'm in at the time, I always go home. I always fly home, because I'll drive to that farm, or I'll drive to my high school or middle school, or I'll drive somewhere in this country town. And I'll be like, man, this is like where I came from. And it's such a humbling experience. Like, I could be here right now. There's a lot of people that I went to school with that are still there.
Right.
And so they never left town, and they have 3, 4, or 5 kids. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but they're working these lower income jobs, and they think that this is like all that life is. And I think that it's so important to like get out of your hometown, or get away from your parents, or get away from like whatever confines you feel like you grew up in. Because that's what I did. And that's how I would have never had the experience of understanding that there was a whole nother world out there.
Yeah. Stretching is definitely important.
Yeah,
stretching
absolutely.
out of your comfort zone. And I know that having struggles are important too. I think struggle is a critical component to learning. Like,
100%.
After all, babies learn to crawl when their toys are just out of reach.
Yeah.
So putting yourself into a struggle environment, like you were baling hay and alfalfa on the farm. What was the transition? Like, what did you do? What caused the transition from that?
Yeah, for
to
sure.
was
So, actually, my mother worked at the university that was my alma mater.
Okay.
So it was always like this direction had been like carved out for me.
Okay.
Which was, you're going to go to this school, you're going to, study whatever they have available, within their curriculum. And so you're going to get a degree, and then you're going to go do whatever, right? Okay. Whatever you decide to do. And so my dream was always, I wanted to be an architect. And I wanted to be an engineer. I was always an artist growing up. I was into music. I was very creative.
Okay.
And so I was like, man, I'm going to either go to Virginia Tech to be an architect, or I'm going to go to a music school, or I'm going to do something like that. But architecture was always like my dream. And so when I went to this college, I had been goofing off like all of high school. So I didn't have the grades to go anywhere that I actually wanted to go. So I actually ended up going to this school, because my mom had worked there for like 20 years. And so I got in, and
so it wasn't what you knew, it's who you knew.
Yeah, exactly. It was that type of scenario. And so, no, I got in, and all they had was like business, and they had some music. It was a music school, but I just wasn't into it anymore in that manner. And so I was like, man, I guess I'll go for business. The only other option is like nursing or like English or something. And I just don't see myself doing any of that. So yeah, I went to school for business. I got a degree in accounting. Okay. And it's so funny because growing up, I hated math. It was actually my worst subject. Okay. And that's what I do today is math. So go figure. So yeah, that's what ended up happening. I went to school and I met a really good friend of mine. We're still best friends to this day. He's actually my business partner at Millennium Mortgage. Okay. You know, he was like the guy that founded the entire concept of our company. And so we were really good friends in college, and he lived in New York. And I already told you I had this obsession with New York. So I'm like, dude, I have to come to New York. I need to be there. Like, I've always seen it on TV and I loved it. And so he's like, fly out. So I went to New York several summers back to back, and I was obsessed with it. Every time summer break would happen, I would go with him to New York. Go to
the Big Apple and just enjoy life.
Yeah, it was amazing, man. And so like one summer we lived with his mother in the Bronx, and we used to commute in, and I worked at the 92nd Street Y.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And yeah, man, it was a journey. So I was like in love with the city, and I had never experienced anything like this. And it was like every time I would go to New York and come back, I had a different perspective on life. I had a different perspective on the town, and like it was just more of an inclination of or really a solidification of this idea that I'm not meant to be here. Like there's so much more out there.
Such a big diversity between New York City and Winchester. So
yeah, man.